All right, we are going to be going over the hip hinge. The hip hinge is one of the base foundational movement patterns that all other exercises are built on top of. And the hinge is what the deadlift is, the single leg deadlift, the RDL, and it basically at its simplest level is just moving at the hips rather than moving at the knees. So from the lower body, we can only move from two places. So the ankles, I'm not counting, but the knees and the hips. So if you do a squat, Shannon, just do a squat. This is a knee dominant movement, right? So her knees are flexing, most of the motion is there, right? A hip hinge would be coming from the hips, right? So go ahead. So this is, you see there's a little bend in the knees, but most of the motion is coming from the hips. So that's what we're talking about when we're doing a hip hinge. The difficulty in doing the hip hinge is that most people, when we live our everyday lives, don't know how to separate different joints. So when I say just bend at the hips, not at the knees and not through the spine, that's a skill that many of us have never practiced. If we've never done anything in the gym, if we are used to sitting all the time and working on a computer or whatever else. So for some people, this might take a lot of practice. For some people, it might come very naturally. But this is one of those key foundational things that everyone must learn over time. So I'm going to go through with Shannon a few things that people mess up with the hip hinge and then a few corrections. So the first worst culprit is flexing at the spine rather than flexing through the hips. So if Shannon goes to lean, now she's moving at the hips, but also her spine is going like this, right? And if you think about that, when we're just bending down, this is why they say, lift with your legs or lift with your knees or whatever. Because when we go to lift something, go ahead again, Shannon. If she grabs weight here and then goes to stand up, her whole spine is going to have to unfurl, boop, 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 vertebrae by vertebrae, before she can get to this full standing position. And if you have weight in your hand, load, whether it's a deadlift, a box, a couch, whatever it is, each time that vertebrae has to stack, 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 you're giving yourself an opportunity to be injured. Whereas a true hip hinge, go a nice one here, while Shannon's back is moving, it's moving through her hips. There's no actual movement in the spine. Her spine is staying nice and straight and neutral. Come back up, Shannon. Again, the movement comes through the hips, but there was no movement from here to here. So if we go back and look at the core bracing video, where core bracing is going to come back into play here, because we want at its base level, movement through the hips, like we just showed, without moving through the spine. And to do that, we're going to have to brace the core. So if we go into that anterior pelvic tilt that we've been showing, so now the back is arched, the abs are weak. If we go posterior pelvic tilt, the abs are strong and the back is neutral. So this is where we want to start our hinge from. So before we even think about where we're moving, we're going posterior pelvic tilt, abs on. So now Shannon is going to try to hold this position as she sinks her hips away from her. And that's perfect, right? Stand up. Now we're going to go and do one where you kind of dump your hips out right at the beginning and go into anterior pelvic tilt. So a lot of people will go into a hip hinge and they don't brace their core, and you see her back goes right into this arch, right? It's not the worst thing. There are worse ways that you could mess up a hinge, but ideally over time, that means that she lost the brace at her core, because if your abs are here and your pelvis is tilted forward and you're braced, your back can't get into that arch position. Go again and go the other way. Right? Yep. So this is what I'm not looking for, this kind of U slope shape as opposed to posterior tilt. This nice neutral shape is where I want to be. So body weight is one thing, but this is where it all starts. When we're going to take this, and this becomes the deadlift, this becomes the RDL, this becomes a good morning. This hip hinge motion is the foundation for a ton of our lower body exercises, so it's very, very, very important to master. Even if you can only get not as low as Shannon is getting, I'd rather you get to here with perfect mechanics than get to here and have to round your whole back, right? So don't sacrifice form just to think about how low you can get. It's not about getting your chest all the way to the floor. It's about getting where you can get with keeping that nice flat spine like Shannon was just demonstrating.